Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian and I'm here today at the Rock Island Auction Company taking a look at some of the guns that they're going to be selling in their upcoming February of 2018 regional auction. Today we have a Browning high-power pistol made in Canada and sent to China. This is, I think, a really interesting story of a very much a lesser recognized and lesser known aspect of World War II, namely China. What was going on in China? So there is a long and interesting story about these pistols, and I figured since you can only see a little bit of this thing from back there, we're going to go ahead and zoom straight into this thing, and I will tell you the story while we take a look at it up close. So let me tell you a tale of an interesting pistol. This actually starts with the John Inglis Company, which was a Canadian industrial conglomerate, big company, started in 1859 as a metalsmithing shop in Ontario. During World War II, it got to the point where just the Ordnance Division, because Inglis did a lot of different things, just the Ordnance Division had over 1 million square feet of floor space. And these pistols are one of the smallest things they made. They also made Bren guns, they made Boys anti-tank rifles, they made 20mm Polston cannons, Polston guns, Brownings. They made a whole lot of different things. In June of 1941, a Chinese delegation arrived to visit the Inglis factory and look at placing some orders for all sorts of equipment and war material. And during this visit, one of the Chinese officers inquired if it would be possible, well, when they were looking for guns, they specifically were interested in Bren guns, and they were also interested in getting Browning high powers. Now, Inglis didn't make Browning high powers at that point, but the Chinese had ordered a small number from FN before the war, and they liked them, and they really wanted to get more. This was one of the most modern pistols available at that time. This order kind of puttered around for a couple years until in 1943, in February, the Mutual Aid Board authorized $100 million of war loans to China. Now, Mutual Aid Board was an organization set up by the Canadian government to basically provide loans to foreign countries for war material. The idea was the Canadian government would provide the actual money, pay it to Canadian companies to manufacture stuff for various other combatants to use, and then after the war, those other combatants would repay the loans to the Canadian government. So in total, this accounted for something like $3.7 billion worth of loans and war material during the course of the conflict, and 100 million of that went to China. So when that 100 million came through, the Chinese came back and they reiterated their interest in getting these pistols. In total, they actually ordered, they ordered 180,000 of these pistols, which was a pretty monumental order. And Inglis was all for this. They also ordered Bren guns and a bunch of other things as well. But Inglis went about getting the money and setting up and started to tool up. They talked to FN in Belgium, or rather the representatives of FN in exile. They got a limited license to produce the guns for China. They actually got 2 of FN's main engineers, René Leloup and Dieudonné Saive, who was actually the designer of the Browning high power. He was John Browning's, not apprentice, but he took over where John Browning left off when Browning died at FN and finished the Browning high power from Browning's original prototypes. At any rate, both of those guys actually came over to Canada to help work on the production. They got the whole technical package from FN, and they went ahead and actually fired up production. Now, what's interesting is, at this point, the British military was using and issuing Webley .38 caliber revolvers. And when the British Special Operations Executive heard that a Commonwealth nation, or an imperial nation, was going to start major production of a 9mm service automatic, they were very interested because this was a pistol that would make a lot more sense to use in sneaky SOE aid to resistance and underground movements. It'd make a lot more sense than the revolvers because 9mm ammunition was readily available in Europe as opposed to .38-200 British revolver ammo. So they chimed in and they placed an order for 50,000 of them at the same time. So this gave Inglis a pretty substantial contract for these guns. Now, it takes a little time to set up production like this, and In January of 1944, the first pre-production guns went through trials, and they were good. And production, the first delivery was actually in February of 44, with a subsequent delivery in June of 44. Now, there is still this question of how do these guns get to China? Well, the answer was the Allies were working with India, India also being part of the British Empire at that time, Commonwealth later. And so these guns were actually shipped to Karachi in India, along with all sorts of other war material and food and aid and all sorts of stuff. And from Karachi, they had to actually be airlifted over what was called the Hump, over Burma into China by C-47 pilots. And that was a major clog in the system. That was a choke point in the supply system. There's only so much that you can airlift, you know. There's a big difference between sending over a freighter full of crates and then having to load all of those crates, a few at a time, into relatively small aircraft and fly them through dangerous places to actually provide the aid. And that proved to be a problem. So 4,000 of these guns were actually delivered to the Chinese, and another 14,500 were completed and sent to basically put in Canadian depots awaiting shipment to Karachi. And at that point, people started to have doubts about this whole Chinese military aid thing at all. Military figures, government figures started looking at this and recognizing that, you know what, the Chinese aren't actually really using these against the Japanese. They don't have any, you know, they're not really. The idea with this was we'd provide the money because the Chinese would use them to fight our enemies and take pressure off of our soldiers. And that wasn't really happening. So debate started up about whether to even continue this project or not. This all led to the actual cancellation of the contract once, with about 20,000 pistols having been made. So of that 14,500 or so that were sitting awaiting shipment, a number of them, about 6,000 of them, were taken by SOE and used, and the remainder were actually basically procured, paid for and procured by the Canadian military. And they had been looking at this gun with quite a lot of interest. It seemed much better than their revolvers. The Canadians actually began testing and ultimately would adopt the pistol in late 1944 as the Canadian military standard. And this also prompted the British to take a serious look at it, and the British would later adopt the gun as well. Now, production would pick back up later, you know, at the midpoint of 1945, once Germany was defeated. The Chinese were still interested in the guns, and it was, since the war was no longer a pressing necessity, you know, the Canadians and the British weren't depending on Inglis for a lot of other war material anymore. The company was allowed to restart the contract, and production really actually got into high gear in late 1945. The majority of the pistols made, like another 40,000 of them, were made and shipped to China before, once again, problems came up. It became clear that the Nationalist Chinese were losing to the Communist Chinese, and the British Empire and the Canadians weren't interested in equipping the Communist Chinese forces, so they ended up canceling the order once again. In total, just under 70,000 of these guns were manufactured, with most of them going to China, but there were about those 15,000 that were procured by the British and the Canadians in the middle. So a couple detailed things that we can look at. These serial numbers are quite distinctive because they all have a CH prefix in them. That is actually for China. Now, the number at the front, if you take out the CH, you basically have the full serial number of the gun. So the first ones were just CH and 4 digits. And when they got to 10,000, they added a 1 in front of the CH. So these went up to the 6 series, 6 CH, and it's like 6,700, so 66,700 total. Those will be marked on, as you can see right here, the barrel, the slide, and the frame. On the opposite side, you have basic Inglis markings here, as well as a couple Chinese characters indicating Chinese possession of the guns. Like the very first 4,000 guns had a pantographed Chinese inscription up here that basically said property of the Chinese National Army. But that was dropped fairly quickly. These guns all have long-range tangent sights. They go out to 500 meters, which is rather optimistic, but it is distinctive of these guns. Interestingly, when the guns that were being manufactured in this contract for the British, for SOE, did not have the tangent sight. They just had a plain notch rear sight. And those will have T prefix serial numbers instead of CH. There is, of course, a slot in the back of the grip for the shoulder stock attachment. And a couple things to point out on the stocks themselves. They are marked SA Limited, that's Small Arms Limited. That was the subcontractor that made them for Inglis. And they'll be dated 1944 and 1945. There are Chinese-made versions of these stocks as well. You can identify the original British one or the original Canadian ones by these lighter colored wood inserts on the hinge and the latch. That's pretty distinctive. You'll also find a piece of felt at the bottom to pad the muzzle. That's not hard to find in a reproduction one or a fake one, but you'll only find this lighter colored insert on authentic stocks. And in addition to serving as a shoulder stock, they also serve as a holster for the gun. So there is typically a cloth, a snap and a belt loop that attaches to this so that you can hang the gun on your belt. Well, I don't know about you, but I think it's a pretty cool story that through many twists and turns goes from basically an offhand Chinese request for a pistol to, well, kind of to the British Army adopting them as standard. So the other cool thing about these particular guns on a practical note is they are the most affordable pistols you can get that can have attached shoulder stocks without having to be registered as short-barreled rifles in the US. Normally, that would be required. However, a bunch of early guns that were produced with shoulder stocks have been exempted from that requirement by ATF. Now, a lot of these are very uncommon pistols or very expensive pistols. You know, things like early Bergmans with shoulder stocks, early Mannlichers with shoulder stocks, early Colts with shoulder stocks even. However, these are exempted, and the price point on these is far below a lot of those more exotic pistols, and this is about the most modern of the guns that is has that sort of exemption. The Browning High Power is it's a double stack 9mm. Parts are easily available. It's a reliable gun. It's a great shooting gun. So if you're looking for something that has cool historical value and also is a really practical gun to shoot, the Inglis High Powers are a pretty cool example that might suit your fancy. So if you do want this particular one, take a look at the description text below. You'll find a link there to Rock Island's catalog page on this guy. You can see their price estimate, their pictures, their description, and so on. And there are actually a couple other of these in the auction as well. So if you browse through the catalog, you can find those also. Thanks for watching.